The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving.
Beth and I hope that by the time that you're listening to us this week, your stomachs are full of good food, your hearts are full with brand new memories, and that you're ready to sit back and relax with us for a little while your food digests. So in honor of Thanksgiving, we thought we'd forego the paranormal and skip the creepy unsolved mysteries and focus on the Thanksgiving holiday, and one of the traditions that you may have even taken part in.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, it was always a big deal for my family and I to sit together, turn on the TV, and watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade together. I used to run into the kitchen during every commercial break to grab snacks as fast as I could and hightail it back to the couch so I didn't miss anything. And, of course, the goal was to watch all the way through so that I didn't miss Santa Claus at the end. So, with the smell of turkey roasting in the oven and the promise of my favorite side dish, mashed potatoes, I wasn't thinking about marketing or the cost of balloons or the history behind the parade. I didn't even realize that the Macy's parade was only one of several televised parades, because for my family, it was the tradition to watch this one. So, did you watch it when you were growing up?
Yeah, I used to watch it while my grandmother was preparing Thanksgiving dinner. It was always a fun time.
And it got you out of having to help.
Well, there wasn't enough room in our kitchen to help.
Well, there you go. I always wondered if it was a ploy by my mother to make sure everybody did stay out of the kitchen. So tonight, we thought we'd dive into the history of the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. And regardless of whether it's a traditional part of your holiday or not, we think you'll get a kick out of tonight's story. So, here we go. Macy's was established in 1858 and then opened their iconic store on New York City's Herald Square in 1902. According to History.com, Macy's and Company went public in 1922 and opened several regional locations. But their flagship store on Herald Square was doing so well that they were able to expand just 2 years later so that they covered the entire city block, all the way from Broadway to 7th Avenue. To celebrate the grand opening of their massive store, they decided to hold a parade as a way to jumpstart their holiday shopping season. Advertised as a Macy's Christmas parade, they planned the parade route so that it ended at the store, and employees were stationed there to drop the curtains covering the display windows. It was their goal to wow the crowds with their opulent and impressive displays. It was a brilliant marketing strategy, but Macy's didn't actually come up with it. Gimbel's in Philadelphia had started their own promotional Thanksgiving parade a few years earlier in 1920. Gimbel's parade featured 50 people, 15 automobiles, and a local fireman dressed up as Santa Claus. By 1958, the Gimbels Parade was the oldest parade in the entire nation, and it featured Jimmy Dean as the Grand Marshal. And in Detroit, J.L. Hudson's department store was having their own promotional parade. In future decades, Captain Kangaroo would be their Grand Marshal. But back in 1924, up until that point, New York City only had the Ragamuffin Parade, an annual event where local children dressed up in tattered costumes and went door to door asking for pennies, apples, and candy. But if Macy's was going to throw a promotional parade, they were going to make sure that theirs was the best one yet. So, Macy's decided that their parade would begin at 9 a.m. It would coincide with people both going to and leaving church, and it would give spectators plenty of time to get to the afternoon football game between Syracuse and Columbia universities. For weeks, Macy's ran full-page advertisements promising a spectacular event. The parade would be Mother Goose or nursery rhyme themed, and their floats would feature the old woman who lived in a shoe, Little Miss Muffet, and Little Red Riding Hood. Nearly 250,000 people came to see that spectacle, with spectators lined up 4 or 5 people deep along the sidewalks on Parade Day, November 27, 1924. Macy's employees dressed up as clowns, cowboys, and knights in shining armor, and they were followed down the parade route by dozens of live animals on loan from the Central Park Zoo, including elephants, monkeys, camels, and bears. It was meant to be a circus-like atmosphere, but it's been said that the noise from all the wild animals and the 4 marching bands scared as many kids as it thrilled. I should also mention that the Macy's employees who were in the parade were a little rattled having all these wild animals walking so close behind them. At the end, of course, was Santa Claus on a float that sounds truly impressive. He was sitting in a sleigh on top of a mountain of ice, and he was being pulled by reindeer. 6 miles later, Santa stopped in front of Macy's, and as the 10,000 spectators stationed at the end of the parade route watched in anticipation, he stepped down from his sleigh, was crowned the King of Kitties, and then climbed a ladder up to a golden throne that was mounted on the store's marquee. Santa blew on a trumpet, and at the same time, all of the curtains in front of Macy's display windows were thrown aside to reveal wondrous scenes from Mother Goose nursery rhymes. When police lowered the ropes cordoning off the eager spectators, children rushed each other to get the first up-close look at the marionettes and moving figures inside the windows. By all accounts, the parade was a success, and Macy's immediately ran ads saying they would hold another parade just like it the following Thanksgiving. The New York Herald wasn't all that impressed by the spectacle, though. They only ran 2 lines about the parade in the paper the next day. But Macy's kept its promise and held a similar Christmas parade the following 2 years, earning them the notice of the Allied Patriotic Societies. The Allied Patriotic Societies is basically an umbrella group for about 30 single patriotic societies, like the Daughters of the American Revolution or the American Legion, for example. The APS was pretty angry about the Macy's parade and protested against the store for holding such a blatant marketing ploy on a holiday. They felt that it wasn't appropriate for a commercial company to hold a parade on a day of worship, and that they would go to the police commissioner and stop the parade from happening. Now, they obviously didn't get very far with their protest because Macy's held the parade again the very next year on Thanksgiving. And that year, they added their iconic, massive balloons. According to mentalfloss.com, the parade included a, quote, human behemoth, 21 feet tall, that had to crawl under the elevated structure at 66th and Broadway, end quote. There was also a 60-foot-long dinosaur balloon surrounded by employees dressed up as cavemen, and a 25-foot-long dachshund that, quote, swayed along in the company of gigantic turkeys and chickens and ducks of heroic size, end quote. They also included their very first character balloon, Felix the cat. The huge balloons were an extremely impressive and awe-inspiring sight, and Macy's quickly realized that they were now a major draw for their parade. However, I don't think they realized initially the devil they'd created, since their one-of-a-kind balloons seemed to be more of a headache than they were worth. To start, these early balloons didn't have release valves, and nobody really thought about what to do with them after the parade. Since they were filled with regular air, Macy's decided, heck, they're just balloons. Let's just let them float away. So they did. Felix the cat floated away until he popped. Realizing that they were losing quite a bit of money by creating these balloons and then just letting them go, the following year, in 1928, Macy's built 5 of the massive balloons around central helium-filled bodies fitted with release valves that would slowly leak helium. These 5 special balloons, an elephant, a plumed bird, an early bird trailing worms in its mouth, a 25-foot-tall ghost, and a 60-foot tiger, were expected to stay afloat from anywhere between 7 and 10 days as they slowly deflated. Each one included a return address and the promise of a $100 reward to anyone who brought one of them back to Macy's.
Oh my God, can you imagine finding one in your backyard?
Well, people did, and it turned into quite the problem. According to Mental Floss, the New York Times ran a disclaimer about the balloons, which mentioned the reward and the speculation that by the end of the 10th day, the downed balloons could be anywhere in the country. Their prediction of how far the balloons would float off turned out to be a little exaggerated, but I don't think they were prepared for the all-out fights people would get into over the found balloons. The tiger didn't actually get too far. It came down on the roof of a house on Long Island, but people were so over-eager to get their hands on it that locals and passing motorists ended up in a literal tug-of-war, and the tiger burst into dozens of fragments. Now, the article didn't mention if anyone tried to collect any part of the reward money with their tattered shreds or not. Within the week, 3 more of the balloons landed. One was pursued by tugboats in the East River, and it broke apart into 2 pieces. But the 25-foot ghost, well, it was last spotted floating over the Rockaways out towards the open sea, followed closely by a flock of seagulls. The poor ghost was never found.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine because, there had to be people out there that didn't know anything about this parade.
No, of course not.
And to see this ghost just floating in the air, being followed by seagulls, well, they must have wondered if they were actually seeing what they were seeing.
Imagine the poor seagulls. They...
Yeah, the poor seagulls. I can imagine if they pecked at it. There were probably some down seagulls from
ingesting. Yeah. Yeah, it was not the smartest of plans. So, according to CNNTravel.com, a new Felix the Cat character balloon was introduced in 1931, along with several other balloons, of course. He was filled entirely with helium that year, but Felix turned out to be a little too much for his handlers because when they let him go, he got caught in some high-tension wires and burst into flames.
I'd have paid to see that.
But aviator Clarence Duncan Chamberlain was able to collect $25 in reward money when one of the released balloons snagged on his plane mid-air and he managed to somehow tow it back to his house.
See, you never hear any of this stuff about the Macy Day Parade balloons.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you know about them from watching it, but my God, I never knew the history of these.
No, I didn't either. So Macy's began referring to this release and reward system as the balloon race, continuing to trust that fellow New Yorkers would return their balloons. But the balloon race of 1932 proved to be so potentially dangerous that they decided they had to stop. According to Smithsonian Magazine, a 22-year-old aviation student named Annette Gibson attempted to catch the 60-foot-long Tomcat balloon while she was in the air over Jamaica, Queens. The balloon tangled around her plane's wing and sent her into a terrifying tailspin. Luckily, her flight instructor was in the cockpit with her, and he was able to land them both safely. Macy's, at least, recognized that Gibson's balloon retrieval attempt was far too dangerous and proved that people were willing to do crazy things for reward money, and they stopped releasing the balloons after the parade. In 1934, one of the most famous of all parade balloons made his first appearance. Walt Disney helped design a Steamboat Willie-inspired Mickey Mouse. All of his handlers were dressed up as Mickey Mouse as well. Surprisingly, though, Mickey Mouse does not hold the title of most frequently flown annual balloon, but we'll get to that title holder a little bit later. Today, the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade is reportedly the second largest consumer of helium in the entire world. Only the U.S. government, specifically NASA and the Department of Defense, use more. One day a year, and they're the second largest consumer of helium.
Well, those balloons are massive.
Yes, they are. But it was helium and rubber that shut down the parade between 1942 and 1944. Both items were so desperately needed for the war effort that Macy's decided it was best to cancel the parade entirely rather than have one without their famous balloons. Instead, they donated the balloons to the war effort, which equaled 60 pounds of scrap rubber. Those 3 years, by the way, were the only years since its beginning in 1924 that the parade didn't happen. Even in 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated just 6 days before Thanksgiving, the parade went on as planned. The rationale at the time was that the nation's children deserved some normalcy during that chaotic period. However, all of the floats in the parade were adorned with black mourning streamers. But anyway, back to the 1940s. In 1947, footage from the previous year's Macy's parade was featured in one of the most beloved holiday movies of all time, Miracle on 34th Street. And suddenly, the entire nation knew about the parade. And it was as if every other Thanksgiving parade in the country ceased to exist, even though they mostly kept going for another decade. Being featured in the movie was a huge boost, and it could be the reason why it was televised for the very first time the following year. People all across the country sat in their living rooms and watched a handful of marching bands, 6 balloon characters, and 17 floats go by on their television sets.
And we'll return after this short break.
Hey, did you know? No one really knows why we have a horn of plenty or cornucopia in our Thanksgiving decor, or where exactly it came from. But it just might be from ancient Greece. Baby Zeus drank a lot of goat's milk, and at some point he broke off a goat's horn that is magically filled with never-ending fruit, flowers, and herbs. But if that's where it comes from, how did it become part of our American Thanksgiving? Nobody knows. But one of the first recorded uses of a cornucopia as a decor came from a newspaper article dated 1875 and describes a Santa Barbara, California Presbyterian church service where the altar was festooned with a massive horn of plenty, filled with melons, apples, peaches, pears, oranges, lemons, limes, and olives. Why it was there was never fully explained. But suddenly, publications all across the country began running articles on how to make one the centerpiece of your home decor. And the bigger, the better. Who'da thunk it? All right, we're back, and Wes is going to pick up with the history of the parade starting in the 1950s.
That's right, I am. The 1950s brought on one major new addition to the parade. The Radio City Rockettes joined the procession, which they have done every year ever since. Floats have always been part of the parade too, but they were rather small and always upstaged by the massive balloons. In the 1960s, Macy's began using their own creative teams to design much, much bigger floats, and they have continued to do so every year since. Each float starts as nothing more than a one-dimensional sketch, and then an entire team of designers, carpenters, painters, animators, and electricians bring them to life. In the end, what we see is hundreds of gallons of paint and thousands of pounds of confetti and glitter covering complex inner structures. Their exclusive floats, which are made in a New Jersey studio, are up to 40 feet tall and 28 feet wide, so transporting them through the Lincoln Tunnel could be a huge disaster. To solve that problem, every single float they design can be broken down and folded into a 12.5 foot by 8 foot box. Each one costs anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000 to construct, and on average, each parade has 25 of them. But in the 1925 parade, the best float was probably Caterpillar Sam. With a human-like head wearing a hat and a 100-foot-long torso dressed in a suit, he seemed to undulate down the road. But that year was the only year Caterpillar Sam was ever used. In 1939, The Wizard of Oz hit movie screens, and Macy's included 5 separate floats promoting the movie in that year's parade. They were all push floats, which meant handlers had to push or pull them down the street. The Wicked Witch flew on her broom around a flower patch, the Scarecrow stood up on a haystack, and the Cowardly Lion stood bravely. In the 1960s, Charlie Brown got his own float, And Watership Down and The Hobbit got theirs in the 1970s. 1981 saw one of the biggest and most impressive floats, a replica of the orphanage in Daddy Warbucks' mansion from the movie production of Annie. It was so massive that it literally looked like a movie set piece slowly making its way down the street. 17 actors from the film stood on the suspended balconies and on the mansion's front steps, as Eileen Quinn, Annie herself, belted out "Tomorrow." It, too, was never used again. But let's get back to the balloons and the havoc that they've caused. We had mentioned earlier that Mickey Mouse is not the most often used character balloon in the parade. That honor actually goes to Snoopy, who made his parade debut in 1968 and has been reimagined 8 different times. He's floated his way through 42 parades.
I remember seeing Snoopy in the parade.
Me too. Snoopy was always my favorite.
Yeah.
But you know how much I love Charlie Brown.
I do.
Trying to outdo themselves year after year, the Macy's balloon designers, called Balloonatics, take an entire year to design a new balloon, taking into consideration aerodynamics and engineering. Just like the floats, they start with a pencil sketch, then make a small-scaled clay model. Next, they make 2 small-scale replicas, one for technical details and one for decoration and painting details. They immerse them in water to see how much helium is required to keep them afloat. When that's finalized, they scan the mini versions with a computer so that they have precise fabric pieces to cut out. Once the entire full-size balloon is assembled, which is entirely white, they inflate it and then paint it. They can't paint it pre-inflation or the paint cracks. Finally, they are leak tested and flight tested. All of that cost about $190,000 per balloon. Now before, Beth mentioned the balloon handlers. Each balloon requires around 90 handlers, and every one of them must complete several rounds of training. Handlers are required to weigh at least 120 pounds and to be in excellent physical health. The day before the parade, all the balloons are inflated outside the Museum of Natural History. Each one takes about 90 minutes, with 12,000 cubic feet of helium, which is enough to lift the weight of about 2,500 bathtubs. So yeah, you can see why they want their handlers to be in really good physical health.
I never thought about how freaking heavy they are.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of weight to hold back.
Well, I mean, I've seen the wind, when they're trying to hold on to them and the wind is just bouncing them around like they're nothing. And then when you find out how much they really weigh, it's just weird.
It's impressive. And I'd also thought that this was pretty cool. From noon until 6 p.m. on Inflation Day, spectators are allowed to walk all around the balloons as they inflate. But even with the best safety precautions and intense balloon handler training, there have been some balloon-related accidents, the most notorious being the 1997 Great Balloon Massacre, which I gotta say I've seen. Balloon problems began way before that, though. Remember the flight student who decided to try and catch the Tomcat balloon with her airplane? Well, even after Macy's stopped releasing their balloons into the sky, some major balloon malfunctions occurred. In 1956, according to CNNTravel.com, Mighty Mouse was happily floating along when he suddenly ran into a street sign. The sign ripped a gash into his side, and Mighty Mouse crumbled to the ground. Does anyone else see the irony in this?
A little bit.
A year later, the Popeye balloon delivered more than mussels and a love of spinach when his sailor's cap collected a lot of rainwater. As he glided his way around a corner, his head tipped, his hat overflowed, and dozens of spectators were soaked by the unexpected waterfall. That had to be a lot of water coming down them.
A lot of what? Cold water, too. It's November.
And more recently in 1985, and then again in 1991, Kermit the Frog had not one, but two disastrous encounters with some trees. There's no word on it if it was the same trees both times, but Kermit certainly took a header into the branches on both occasions. Both times, his head deflated almost instantly, making him look a bit ghoulish.
I remember that. I think it was it could have been 85 or 91. I remember he came around the corner and his head was like
I don't
all
remember
deflated
that one.
And
Really?
Yes.
I didn't see that.
And it was just kind of like, oh, what happened to Kermit? Rough night.
Well, Miss Piggy just put him through it.
Yeah. I knew you were going to go there.
Luckily, none of those mishaps, Mighty Mouse, Popeye, or Kermit, caused any injuries. But spectators weren't so lucky beginning in 1993. Macy's, by the way, funds their entire parade. They have never disclosed how much it costs the company each year. They say that it's their gift to the nation, which may explain why they've only canceled 3 parades since 1924. Even bad weather hasn't canceled it, although in at least 2 cases, it probably should have, the first being in 1993. According to MentalFloss.com, Thanksgiving Day in New York City in 1993 was incredibly windy, excessively windy. As the Sonic the Hedgehog balloon made its way down West 58th Street, its handlers couldn't keep it from crashing into a light pole. The pole tore a gash in Sonic's eyes, and debris from the collision fell on a 10-year-old little girl and an off-duty police officer. The little girl sustained minor injuries, but the cop ended up with a broken shoulder. But 1997, the year of the Great Balloon Massacre, was no laughing matter.
And you said earlier you saw it.
Yes, I did.
And I did not. I heard about it, but I didn't watch it that year.
Oh, well, you missed out.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to see live.
I watched it online, though, recently to write the story. To write this episode, I watched it. It was pretty disturbing, to say the least.
Again, excessively high winds, with gusts clocked in about 43 miles per hour, caused all 17 of that year's balloons some major trouble. Several of them ripped and crashed to the ground. Most famously, of course, was the destruction of Barney, the Pink Panther, and the Cat in the Hat, which I don't think Barney being destroyed was such a bad thing.
Did you see the way they did it, though? I mean, you're going to tell everybody how they did it, but that's one of the videos I watched, and it was a little rough. I mean, you said it's no laughing matter, and I'm not laughing because it's, like, funny. It was just uncomfortable to watch it.
I can imagine all those little kids watching poor Barney suffer like that.
Mm-hmm.
Barney's handlers struggled to control the purple dinosaur. Some of the handlers, who were in pairs, actually sat on the ground in a lock position, with their partner anchoring them as the balloon tipped and swayed. At first, the crowd seemed to almost get a kick out of it. You can hear thousands of people in the videos hollering and moaning with every slow pitch forward and sideways lean Barney makes. But then, with one powerful wind gust, the seated handlers were actually lifted to their feet from their locked positions, and Barney careened into a street lamp. As his side billowed out helium, his fabric skin flapped in the wind. The handlers tried desperately to lower him to the ground. Each time they tried, another gust gave him more strength. Eventually, cops armed with knives swarmed in and actually stabbed the purple dinosaur numerous times to deflate his other helium cores. So that's pretty tragic. I mean, can you imagine what these poor kids were going through as they watched this beloved purple dinosaur being stabbed by policemen?
I know.
Over and over and over. And I bet a lot of parents were just like, yes.
There were a lot of jokes at the time. That's what I remember most about it, was all the jokes about Barney and what had happened to him. Yes.
Well, I can't say that he deserved it.
Why don't you tell everybody about the Pink Panther?
The Pink Panther suffered the same fate not long after on 42nd Street. Another cop stabbed his tail with a knife in order to help deflate him and stabilize him. But it was the Cat in the Hat that caused the most trouble and several injuries, one of which culminated in Macy's being sued for $1 million. The Cat in the Hat also knocked into a streetlight, except the way that it collided caused the top arm of the streetlight to actually break off and fall onto the crowd. 4 people were injured, and 2 went to the hospital. One, who was hit in the head, was in a coma for a month. She successfully sued Macy's for $1 million. Although the 1997 parade became somewhat of a water cooler joke, it did result in new regulations and even more intense handler training. Thankfully, the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade has continued on for another 27 years without any similar incidents. Each year they add new floats and new balloons, drawing in 50 million TV viewers and 3.5 million real-time spectators each year. This year, 2024, they had 5,000 volunteers, 17 character balloons, 15 heritage and novelty balloons, 22 floats, hundreds of clowns, 11 marching bands, and 10 performance groups. And as always, at the very, very end was Santa Claus, waving to all the children.
And as a kid, that's all I waited for, was just to see the big guy in the red suit. Because I knew that it meant that Christmas was coming very soon, and that the very next day, after eating our turkey and our mashed potatoes and our pumpkin pie, that we'd be putting up our Christmas tree. But I never realized, as a kid, obviously, that it was a marketing ploy by one New York City department store to get us all on the Christmas shopping bandwagon. But now that I think about it, it definitely worked.
It was ingenious.
Mm-hmm.
What a better way to promote people coming into your store.
Yeah, I know. I remember asking my mother once what Macy's was, because I thought Macy was a person, because it was Macy's parade. And she was like, oh, it's just a department store. But I never made the connection.
You know, and I remember growing up, walking through downtown, when they still actually had storefronts and they had all kinds of cool things out there like Christmas decorations or, Thanksgiving, even Halloween. The storefronts were decorated. And I loved those old awnings that came down, like the striped awnings over the sidewalk. It was just a spectacular time. Train sets set up in the front windows and all the coolest new toys. You don't have that anymore. People are really missing out.
Not up here. No, they still do it in the city, but not up here. But yeah, it was a great way to draw customers in and to try to outdo each other, along the main street.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't seen the whole Barney fiasco, I really highly suggest you go online and watch the videos.
Yeah. The link will be in our show notes. It's one of the links that I looked at.
I'm just glad my kids were too little at that time to see it. Because can you imagine sitting there trying to console them on Thanksgiving, Barney being stabbed?
Well, it was bad enough in 80 whatever when I saw Kermit come around the corner with a deflated head.
I know, that's just a deflated head.
Well, it was still disturbing. He was all like, I hit the mic. That's how upset I was.
Nice. Wow. It's very rare that you get that excited, smacking the mic around.
Well, I realized I was trying to show what his head looked like with my hands, but nobody can see us except you. So I was doing it for nothing, and then I smacked the mic.
Yeah, I just can't believe I saw it in person that time. Well,
97.
I saw it on TV.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, as we said, whether it's part of your tradition or not, we hope you got a kick out of the story, at least learning some of the history, because I certainly did.
No, and I would love to see footage of some of the early day parades.
You can. Yeah, if you go on the site that I went to, there's one where they do have, they have all the floats by name, and then when you click on it, it's either a still picture or it's actual, whatever you call it, remastered footage of the parades.
Oh, I will have to go check that out.
Okay.
Because I really didn't. I just repeated the Barney video over and over and over. Brought me back to that day. I don't know. Those were rough years with Barney. I don't think there's ever been a character since Barney that was so annoying for parents.
I could think of a few.
Can you really?
Yeah.
SpongeBob, I bet.
Nope. I'm not going to say because I don't want to, upset anybody who's listening to us. But there are a few that I don't like.
All right. Well, that said, check out all our links in our show notes. And
we'll see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
Look at you. You did it.
Well, you did a switcheroo on me.
I know. It's kind of good to say the outro, isn't it?
It is. I feel very powerful. Not really.
Hope you're all having a happy Thanksgiving. See all you fellow wanderers again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.